on Twitter and seen a take that's just so bad that you feel like maybe you need to set the world on fire? Hello, my lovely friends. It's Margaret. Welcome back to my channel. Today, we're going to be talking about some of the bad book takes that I have seen in my time on book Twitter. Just some of the ones that I'm just like, that's your opinion. These are going to kind of range the gamut from personal preference, where like someone like it's not necessarily what they're saying is not necessarily a problem, but the fact that they're acting like their personal preference is the epitome of what is good and should be published, all of that stuff, that's kind of just grinds your gears a little bit, all the way to like, we're still here in the year 2022? Still? Why? It's not an exhaustive list by any chance, just the ones that have really like stood out to me in the past couple of weeks and have made me go, maybe Twitter was a mistake. So the first bad take that we're going to start out with is one that I have seen like all over the bookternet, book Twitter, bookstagram, booktube, especially in booktube when people are doing reviews. And it's when someone will like be like, so I don't like this book, therefore this book is bad. And I'm not talking about situations where they don't like it because it's done poorly. It's they don't like the specific thing that is in it. So for example, they don't like enemies to lovers, and the fact that the book is enemies to lovers means the book is bad because they don't like it, they don't like the specific trope, and like you can kind of tell when people are being very biased. It's one of those things where like you can't tell, was it done well, was it done poorly, this, that, or the other thing, just like they're just mad that it exists in the first place and they don't think it should exist because they don't like it. And I'm just like you are not the end all be all of literature. Like what you like does not determine what is and is not good literature. People like stuff that I don't like or dislike stuff that I do like, and like that's valid. I don't feel the need to shit on them if it's just a matter of personal preference. I know it's like a dangerous thing to say because people will use it for really annoying causes, but like let people like stuff, and if you don't like it, just don't read it. Like I'm not saying you shouldn't give it 2 stars because you didn't like the book, but don't say that it's a bad book just because you didn't like it. Does that make sense? Because there are a whole bunch of really well-written books that I'm just like, no, I'd rather set this on fire than ever read it again. Another one that I think is real fun for everyone, and maybe this deserves its own sort of video, but when people are like, trigger warnings, I don't want to do trigger warnings because that will spoil things. Honey, if your book is spoiled by a trigger warning, number 1, are you really like, maybe you should rethink that. It's funny, especially when you see authors complaining about it. Like reviewers I don't see reviewers complaining as much because reviewers, I think, tend to understand for the most part the need for trigger warnings or content warnings, and they kind of they like grasp the concept. But then you'll see an author that's like, oh no, this is a dark book, and if you don't like dark stuff, then you shouldn't worry, like don't read my book. You see some people act like content warnings for a book is going to be like a point by point list of all of the things in the book that could trigger someone, and that's not what trigger warnings are. For example, if you have a character that has a miscarriage in the book, that is something that people need to be warned about. That is something that people have, there's just so much complicated feeling, and there are people that might feel validated by seeing a character go through that, but there are people that might just have that ruin their day. And like a book is not where they need to be unpacking that and dealing with it and all of that stuff. Like, that's what therapy is for. That's what talking with friends and other things like that, people who support you, is for. A book doesn't support you. And so, like, you don't need to say, Jane has a miscarriage in chapter 25 because of XYZ reason. You just need to say, content warning for miscarriage. We don't know whose miscarriage it is. You just need to say, hey, there's a content warning here for this subject. It doesn't tell you who it applies to. It doesn't tell you where in the story it happens. None of that. It's just saying, hey, if you are reading this book, this is something that comes up. It truly is that simple. And I understand if people are like, I don't need trigger warnings, why would we worry about it? But like, there are people that do. You know, not everyone needs allergen warnings, but we still have it on all food because there are people that like just negatively affects, that there are serious consequences for. And I think especially in regards to things that could trigger a relapse or something like that, it is really important to have those kinds of trigger warnings in there. No one is asking you to go into detail. People are just asking you to say, hey, there's sexual assault in this. Hey, there's self-harm in this. Hey, this has a suicide warning. That tells me an event happens in the plot. It doesn't tell me how it affects the plot and how it's going to affect the story. Now, granted, I may be able to put certain pieces together based on knowing that certain events happen and like foreshadowing and stuff. But if the foreshadowing is there, I should have been able to put that together already without the trigger warning. Also, if you're using something like suicide as a gotcha factor, maybe you should rethink that. Like, I don't think that should be one of those things that, like, maybe no? Maybe no? Why don't we not do that? Okay, so another one that's been really fun to see come up on the internet is Tropes Are Bad. I'm gonna give all of my writers a minute to just scream silently on the inside. Or the outside if you would like, you can do that too. Tropes exist for a reason. There is a reason why so many different societies have a Cinderella type story, for example, or why people like reading enemies to lovers, or why people like the found family trope. There are reasons that these tropes exist. Like, the tropes don't exist for the sake of themselves. The tropes exist because there are certain things that happen to people. Like, saying you should not have tropes is like paramount to saying a story should not have a beginning, middle, and end. Every story is going to have tropes in it. Like, you give me show me a story that does not have a trope in it, I will tell you you're wrong. Because people recognize patterns, and that's all this is. Tropes are just people going, this is similar to another story that covers the same subject matter, and another story that has the same subject matter, the same plot point, or whatever. It really has been annoying me, because, like, I see people, like, being so mad about all of these tropes, and I'm just like, then maybe you should stop consuming stories because they're everywhere. You're not going to be able to get a story that doesn't have a trope in it. It's just not, they don't exist. We've had the chosen one trope since we've had humans, my friends. It's been around for a real long time. It wasn't invented in 1992 or whatever when You Know What was written by you know who. Now, that's not to say that there can't be tropes that make you just go, what? Please stop, I don't want to see this anymore. That's fine, I totally understand that. That's what books reviews are for, so you can be like, you know, I don't really like the chosen one trope, I just don't want to read it anymore, and so you can go, like, look at the synopsis and see what's going on there. Someone probably thinks something that you have read and liked is really tropey and bad because it's got tropes in it. Tropes don't make a book bad, I guess is my point. While we're on the subject of tropes and things that people will write into their books, one of my favorite ones to see is author has XYZ thing in their book, therefore they must support XYZ thing. And then I'm not saying that there are authors that don't mishandle certain subjects or certain events or certain things that happen. Like, that happens all the time because people are human, and what you think is a good way or a respectful way to handle something may not be a respectful way to handle it to everyone who has had that experience. And that's also not to say that you should not pay attention to patterns in what an author puts in their books or what an author is uses for storytelling, uses to surprise the audience, uses as shock value things. Like, you should, like, there are definite, this is a nuance because there are definite things where you can sit there and go, okay, you know, this author really likes violence against women. I'm not sure how I feel about that, especially considering that it's a male author. It just seems to be there to be there. That's a valid thing to notice, to be like, this author keeps having this thing that I find distasteful, this thing that makes me uncomfortable, this thing that triggers me in their work. I'm going to actually avoid them from here on out because I don't think their books are for me. It's also good to, like, pay attention to that kind of thing because you're going to start, like, if an author has a pattern, it might be a case of, yeah, this does quite often, maybe I should question why this author has this in their book so much. I won't name it because I don't want their fans coming at me, but some of you may know the situation. There is a very famous fantasy author that while I don't dislike the female characters in their books, they're not ideal, but I read the books, I enjoyed them, I liked the main character, and so I was like, well, like, they're still interesting characters, they're doing their best. It's a dude. Dudes are quite frequently, like, they don't understand to some extent, and maybe they just, like, this is what worked for the story. And then, like it was stuff that was not on its own problematic, because number one, a point could be being made. Number two, their idea of what a strong, like, interesting female character could be different than what my idea is. They might be doing their best to write an interesting, well fleshed out female character and just failing a little bit. And then a blog post surfaced where they said some, or expressed some kind of gross views about women and relationships and how things should be between men and women. And it was mildly incel stuff and a lot of purity culture stuff. And so that's when I sat back and I said, oh, okay, yeah, yep, that's in their books. That makes, these certain things that have happened, that makes sense. And so that kind of made me go like, I don't know that I care about the last book in this series. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I won't read it. Maybe I won't read them anymore. But at the same time, there are certain ways that people can be putting stuff in there because they're processing through something. A lot of these topics are things that we shouldn't not have them in fiction because people go through these experiences. They're very human experiences, and there are people who get comfort from seeing the things that they have gone through, the things that they have dealt with in the life of someone fictional, and being able to connect with that character in a way. And I think that it really just comes down to, A, how did the author handle it? There are ways to have certain things in your plot and make it clear that even though maybe this is the character's view or this is something that is happening in your world, that you yourself do not condone it. You know, I think we need to look at, a lot of the time, you need to look at the whole book versus one scene, and how does that fit in the greater part of the plot. Like, there are a lot of authors that will put things in, especially female authors, will put things in like misogyny to show the fact that they want their character to be able to triumph over that. That's one of the things, like, I know that not everyone likes seeing that. I know people want fantasy where that doesn't happen, that doesn't exist, but for me at the same time, I like seeing women triumph over people that think they are lesser just because they are women. Like, I like that. That is one of the things that I enjoy having happened in the media that I consume. So I think it really comes down to paying attention to how the author has handled a certain situation and paying attention to patterns, paying attention to how do they use this, when do they use this, how often do they use this, especially when they're talking about the experience of someone that is not them, like outside of their own experience. Another one that's really fun to see is, like, I am so sick of insert thing here, fairy tale retelling, dystopian, whatever, etc. Stop publishing them. And, like, my friend, that is an opinion that you have. I understand. Don't read them. Don't read them. Because me, personally, I love a good dystopian. I am always here for a good dystopian. I'm always here for a fairy tale retelling. You can retell the story of Cinderella as many times as you want. I will still sit down to read that retelling and enjoy the heck out of it, provided that you have written it well. If you can't tell, my window is open and the wind has decided. Ooh, I hope that's, you know what? I hope that's not screwing up my sound. Let's just close that. Also, another point that many people have made on the internet is that we got a bajillion Cinderella retellings with white girls at the center. Don't have nearly as many with black girls or Indian girls or Native American girls or Southeast Asian girls or East Asian girls or South American girls, Latinx girls. Like, we don't. There's just a dearth of representation in regards to anyone who is not white. So, like, just because you're tired of seeing Cinderella retellings or dystopians, or you're tired of heist stories, doesn't mean that everyone is, and please stop acting like it does. Please stop acting like that means that they should never be published again. Again, it's one of those things that it's fine for you to dislike them, But to make the argument that because you dislike them, they shouldn't be in publishing anymore. We should stop making those kinds of stories. Go read your book and leave the rest of us alone. I am going to take a sip of water because apparently I am very salty. Another one that makes me really, just really fiery is when I see someone be like, hey, this preteen teen character in a middle grade or YA book is really immature. This book is bad. I really hope there are no, teenagers or preteens in your life, because how do you stand them if you can't stand characters making stupid decisions, immature decisions, because they are, in fact, immature? Maturity is greatly linked to age. Typically, not all of us mature as well as we should. I'll be honest about that one. I read the first Arusha book earlier this year or late last year, and it was really good because I found a lot of the decisions that she was making, they were dumb. I would not have made those decisions. But looking at her, looking at the fact that she's 12, looking at what her motivations were, she was acting with the most maturity that she had. And so it made sense for her, a 12-year-old, to be making these decisions based on whether or not these people will like her, whether or not she will be, have friends. That kind of, having that as your motivation makes sense when you're dealing with a middle grader, especially considering that being in middle school is brutal. They are vicious. And it was funny because I'm reading it and I'm going, there are going to be people that are going to dislike this book because they think that this main character is immature, when I'm she's making very age-appropriate decisions and has very age-appropriate problem-solving skills, in my opinion, as someone who has worked with middle schoolers, and some very immature ones at that. And you can't be mad at them for not knowing how to be an adult when they're not an adult. Yeah, of course he made a dumb decision. He's 16. His frontal lobe is not fully developed yet, guys. That's not to say that there are not books where the character is maybe written a little bit younger than they should be. And I think it comes down to the character's circumstances and what they've been through to some extent in just determining how mature should they be when we're talking about a child. But you'll get people that review stuff and they'll just be like, yeah, this character's immature, I hated the book, it was dumb. And I'm like, maybe something should be gatekept. Maybe you shouldn't be reading YA. Maybe you shouldn't be reading middle grade. I'm not saying that authors cannot write characters that are way too immature for their age level. It's just that a lot of the time when I see it, especially for books that I've written, I'm like, no, that makes sense because she's 15. It makes sense that she wouldn't wait for this. It makes sense that they wouldn't go get their parents because they're afraid they're going to get in trouble. It makes sense that we're doing this. Does it make sense that these children are in charge of saving the world? No, not necessarily. Yeah, so that just grinds my gears when I see people complaining about a child in fiction being immature when the target age range is that child's age, and it's a plot point, Sharon. It's a plot point. Another one that's really fun to see is when you'll have this book, which is part of XYZ genre. Let's use heist as a placeholder, and y'all are all gonna know exactly what I'm talking about. This book, which is a heist book and has all of the elements that a heist book has, is a knockoff of this other popular heist book. And I'm just like, you do realize that there are certain key plot points that all heist books have to hit. You do realize this. You do realize that the planning part of the heist book is part of why people read the heist book. That the figuring out, the problem solving part of the heist book is part of the heist book. The team aspect of a heist book is part of why people like heist books. Are you aware of this? Are you aware of this? Just because something has similar elements to another book in its same genre does not mean it's a knockoff of that other book. Doesn't mean it. Even if it has certain characteristics that are the same, it doesn't mean it's a knockoff. Like, oh my god, both of the main dudes that arrange everything have revenge as a motivation. Have you seen Ocean's 11? Have you? There is always something motivating at least one person on the heist team that is more than money. You know? Like, there's always something that's doing that. And then we often, like, the most often that we see this come up is when we have a book by a BIPOC author that is being compared to a very well-established book by a white author. And then people are like, oh, huh. Both of the main dudes' motivation is revenge. These must be the same book. Both of these books have a Desi love interest. These must be the same book. Did it occur to you that in like this other case that it was actually representation for the author? I've seen it for multiple things in multiple genres. There are people that think Percy Jackson is a knockoff of the book that shall not be named. And I'm just like, where? How? In what way? Like, they're both dark-haired boys with light-colored eyes that end up involved in something that they didn't plan to be involved in. But, like, that last one is a chosen one thing. Like, the chosen one is very seldom prepared for what they end up getting involved in. I think, like that's kind of the point of the chosen one. It's not like typically they're not chosen by the people that know what's going on. Usually they're chosen by some force outside of themselves that they don't have control over. You know, the chosen one is typically not, like, raised and trained to be the chosen one, although those are really fun stories. Typically they end up thrust into something that they know very little about. Part of that trope is because it makes it real easy to explain to the audience what the heck is going on if your main character also has no idea what's going on. One of these days I will go on a full-on rant about that comparison because it really makes me mad. They're different, and the authors could not be more different in the things that they support and the damage that one of them has done and the other one tries not to do. Another one that I love, I'm being sarcastic here. When people are like, I don't like this ship, therefore I must find 75 different reasons why it's toxic. You realize you can just not like a ship, right, guys? Definitely there are some toxic ships out there. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. Don't look at me wrong. But it's funny because a lot of the time I see the people that I see having to go out of the way to prove that a ship, like the main ship, is toxic are people who are not shipping the main ship and they're actually shipping one that is kind of sketchy. I mean, and then there's Twilight, in which case both of them not great options, but like that's a whole different thing. But like it's okay to just not like a ship. You don't have to come up with 75 different reasons for why the main character should not be with this other character that you don't like, or you don't think that they're as good with, or you don't see the chemistry. You just don't see the chemistry. You don't have to have a reason to not like the ship. You just don't like the ship. And like this comes from my place in fandom where you'll see people just like pull stuff out of their ass to be like, yeah, this other love interest is a terrible person. And when like in context, in the story, it's like, yeah, he grabbed her, but like she was falling off a building. What did you want him to do? Just let her fall? You don't have to justify why you don't like a ship. You can just not like it. You can just not like it. You can just be like, yeah, this isn't my ship. It's fine. Oh my god, he grabbed her hand! Did it occur to you that he is trying to drag her out of danger? Did it occur to you that they're both being shot and he's like, hey, this way? Like, it's fine, I'm fine. Another one that you'll see is like people saying, hey, this book I found personally upsetting, and then going after the book or the author and being like, oh my god, you should have written this book. No one should read this book. It's the worst book ever. I'm sorry that you didn't enjoy that book because it was upsetting, because it touched on something very personal, because it touched on something that puts you in a bad headspace. That is, like, you definitely should not have had to read that book without knowing that that was in there. But just because a book, again, has upset you, and I'm not, like, I understand, like, most people are going to talk about being triggered, but it's like, I see it, like, like, a book can upset you without it triggering you, so, like, and that's valid as well. But you'll see people be like, oh my god, this book upset me, and I don't think it should be a book. I don't think anyone should have published it. And it won't be necessarily, like, it's not in regards to something bigoted that has happened. It's not in regards to the book being homophobic or being super sexist or things like that. It's in regards to stuff that is very touchy, that is very personal, in regards to stuff that people find upsetting, and it's not necessarily, like, it's not an attack on their person. Another one that, like, this is very, like, personal to me, I guess, and might veer into, like, my own personal opinion, but it annoys me anyway, so I'm going to talk about it. But it's when people, like, and this is something, like, you see a lot as a fantasy reader. It's a trope that happens, and I will not lie, there are ways that trope can be handled poorly, and there are ways that I don't like that trope. But for the most part, typically, like, you'll see it's worked in, for me at least, a lot of the time I see it worked in ways that work for me. And then that's when you'll have, like, a character that is physically under 18 and has been trapped as under 18 because of a curse, because this, because that, yada yada yada, because they were stuck inside a magic lamp for the last 100 years, something like that. And people will be like, oh, but, like, they've been around for 100 years, so clearly they're an adult at this point. Because if there's, like, an in-world kind of implication or explanation that, like, their brain was trapped at whatever age they got caught at, or that they're from a species that matures more slowly than the human species does, and I'm speaking of, like, specifically brain function, like, if mentally this character is in the same place as the other character who is physically the same age as them, I'm like, okay, that's what, I don't personally have a problem with that. I don't. Like, I haven't read the book, but I have seen the movie, like, what's her name from Interview with a Vampire, where she's Kirsten Dunst's character, where she is, physically, she looks like a child, but her brain has kept developing. Like, that would be a situation where I'd be like, okay, but, like, she is a mature adult inside, but like, the number of years lived does not always equal maturity, and, like, if their brain is at the same developmental stage, or as, like, for me, a lot of the time, I just assume that when these things happen, this person's brain is still at the same developmental stage as this person, if that makes sense. Like, that's just kind of what I assume. Like, someone was getting mad because there's a genie in Teen Titans, and, like, there's some romantic stuff that might be happening between this character and Damien. And I don't know, I haven't got caught up on that, but, like, I'm like, well, but, like, he's 14, and if this person is also physically and mentally 14, I don't care that they have lived for 1,000 years. They've been trapped in a lamp for most of that, I do believe, is what's going on there. Like, you might have more experience, you might have more knowledge, but that does not necessarily mean that that there is going to be a power imbalance in the relationship. That is up to the author to kind of mitigate. So that's a particular one that's personal to me, and it annoys me when people are like. And then the final one that I have is one that I saw on Twitter, and it made me go, because it's less something that makes me angry and more something that makes me go, my friend, you are extremely ignorant. And that's when you specifically see people going, I don't care about an author's race or gender, I just read what I like. And here's the problem with that. Here's the problem. This is a bad take. It's also rooted in racism, misogyny, homophobia. Insert your bigotry here based on the author and the various identities that they have. It's not necessarily that there is anything wrong with reading what you like. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is, there is a very good chance, if you are not paying attention and you are only reading the books that come across your feed because they're popular, because your mom read them or your friend from school read them or whatever read them, that you will step back. There's a huge possibility that you'll step back and you'll see that the people that you are reading are primarily white, male, straight, and cis. Because that is who publishing pushes. If you read a lot of YA, you may have a little bit more even split between male and female when it comes to authors, but just typically the books that publishing puts forth and puts the most money behind mostly fits into those categories. They mostly are Rick Riordan. Not that I don't love him, but like they're mostly someone like that. It's not that you are trying, for example, to primarily read white authors. It's just that if you are not putting an effort into finding authors that are not white, there is a high chance that you won't read any authors that are not white, or you'll read very few of them, because you have to actively search for them a lot of the time. The bestseller list is not as diverse as it could be, and it is slightly rigged, and so much of it is dependent on, again, publishing and what they want to put forward, what they want to get behind, and all of that. But when only certain authors make it to the bestseller list most of the time, then the bestseller list looks a certain way. And then because the bestseller list looks a certain way, publishing wants to only buy those certain books, and like maybe Angie Thomas every now and then. So like that is a huge thing if you don't know in publishing. Like a lot of publishing houses will be like, oh no, sorry, we already have the Asian American book for this year. We don't need any more Asian American authors. And it's like, well, yes you do. Yes you do, because number one, when you say Asian American, what do you mean? That's a whole other discussion. And someone was talking on Twitter, I can't remember who it was, but they mentioned the fact that like the middle grade bestseller list is primarily dominated by books that came out 10 years ago. And there are very few books that have come out recently that are on that bestseller list. It's things like Percy Jackson that are dominating the bestseller list, and they get so much momentum, it is very, very difficult for anyone else to knock them off of that list and then therefore get their own spotlight, get it so that people in the wider world are aware of their book. One of those things that like, and I didn't know the person that was putting this take on there. I can't speak for them and their motivations and stuff, but like, you know, I find that like it's probably a half and half, that this comes from ignorance or this comes from actual like avoidance of reading about the other. I have not regretted one bit sitting down and going, most of what I read right now is white. Let me fix that. I haven't. Some of my favorite books I have found because I sat and said, you know what? I want to do better than just reading Brandon Sanderson over and over and over and over again. You know, no offense against him. On the surface, being a colorblind to anything, it seems like a good idea when you are white. And yet, you are, like, if that is your attitude, the reality is that it feeds into a system and it leaves you unaware. Alright, so those are all of the bad book takes that I have seen recently. Let me know in the comments if you've seen any bad book takes that they annoy you. If you're not feeling chatty, go ahead and leave me like the angry face emoji with the like they're cussing. Like leave me that one, just because I did get a bit heated in this in a few places. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also, if you enjoyed this video, I'll have other videos over here that you may enjoy as well. I will have something just for you up here, and then whatever is newest on my channel down here. That is it for now, my friends. Happy reading, and I will see you later when we will talk about more wordy, nerdy things. Bye!